It's great to be with you all virtually today. My name is Chad Reed, and I am the Director of Programs and Growth at Ivory Innovations. Ivory Innovations is an applied research institution focused on catalyzing innovation and housing affordability. We're best known for the Ivory Prize, which is an annual award granted to startups and other organizations working to improve housing affordability. But we also publish tools and research. We host a national hackathon for college and grad students called Hack a House. And we're currently in the process of building about 1,500 units of affordable housing in Utah, where our main office is located. That said, I am based in Boston, and we also have a small team in San Francisco. Beyond my work with Ivory, I've also worked for a few other organizations in the housing space, and I spent the past couple of years working with the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard. We co-authored a series of papers focused on manufactured housing construction costs, barriers to more widespread adoption of manufactured housing, and how to overcome those barriers. And I'll be getting a little bit into what we found later in my presentation today. For the bulk of my talk today, I'm just going to try to give you all a high-level overview of the different types of construction innovation that are out there and how they can improve productivity and bring down housing costs. Our work at Ivory Innovations is sponsored by major organizations in the housing space, Freddie Mac, Builders First Source, Weyerhaeuser, to name a few. And we have no financial interest or equity stake in any of the companies or solutions that we support. So the goal of this presentation and of all of our work at Ivory Innovations is generally just to support regulatory and technological advancement in the housing industry with the ultimate aim of reducing housing costs for home buyers as well as renters in the US. Finally, I just want to say quickly that if you're interested in learning more about anything that I talk about today or have questions, please check out our website, it's ivoryinnovations.org, or feel free to email me directly at ivoryinnovations.org. I'll also be providing some links and resources in my last few slides, so feel free to check those out or write down the URLs and take a look. Okay, just to quickly summarize what I'll be covering today, I'll be starting with just a quick overview of the need for more affordable entry-level housing supply. From there, I'll get into why construction innovation is important and why it specifically has an impact on boosting the supply of affordable entry-level housing in the US. I'll then provide an overview of the main forms of construction innovation that are out there, the things that we've identified through our work at Ivory Innovations. And then finally, as I mentioned, I'll get into takeaways as well as some resources for further learning. To start with, I just want to address the question of, again, why productivity matters to housing affordability. A lot of you may already know this, so I'll make it pretty quick. But to start with, I wanted to show this graph that shows that growth in the number of homes built has not kept pace with growth in the total number of households in the US. So the red line here represents the total housing deficit in the US, and the blue line represents the deficit in single-family homes, which, as you can see, is quite large. These numbers are in the thousands, so conservatively, relative to households formed, the US is currently facing a shortage of about 2 million homes. Meanwhile, home prices are growing much faster than incomes. So the data in this graph show price to income ratios in the 100 largest metro areas in the US, with the bars in the background showing the number of metro areas in each ratio bracket, and the brackets are shown across the bottom of the screen. And then the line, the dark line across the middle of the graph, represents the ratio of price to income for the US as a whole. So if you follow that line, you can see that in the early 2000s, there's a steep increase in this ratio, which corresponds with the housing bubble that led to the 2008 financial crisis. After a slight dip following the crisis, the ratio begins to climb again, particularly in the last decade. This recent rise signals that, once again, home prices are rapidly outpacing income growth. Where this chart begins in the 1980s, we can see that the average price to income ratio in the US was around 3. So median household income in 2023 was around $80,000. And for comparison, if we had a price to income ratio of 3 today, this would translate to a median home price of $240,000. I think we all know that that is much lower than what we're actually seeing today. And the ratio of price to income that we see today is actually around 5 across the US, with many areas seeing ratios much higher than that. So all this just tells us that it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to afford to buy homes. Despite this dramatic growth in home prices, residential construction productivity has stagnated for decades, as we can see in this figure from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. When we talk about productivity here, what we're talking about is the ratio of output to hours worked, where output is measured as the number of housing units built, and hours worked refers to the labor input, which of course translates directly to time and money. What's striking about this graph is that productivity today is actually lower than it was in the mid-1980s. This is especially surprising when we consider that we're supposedly in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, with rapid technological advancements being brought to market across virtually every industry across over the past decade. However, the construction industry clearly has not followed this trend. Even if we extend this graph back over the past 75 or even 100 years, there really has just been minimal growth in residential construction productivity. So the takeaway here is that we have in front of us a significant opportunity. The construction industry is overdue for innovation. The hope, of course, is that by leveraging novel solutions to boost productivity, we can deliver more housing supply for the same labor expense. Currently, construction costs account for about 60% of the average sales price of a home, with roughly 40% of those construction costs going directly to labor. To put that into perspective, home builders are spending around $157,000 on labor alone for each home, which equates to about a quarter of the total sales price. Given how substantial this cost is, even modest improvements in productivity through innovative construction methods like the ones that we'll be talking about today can significantly impact overall housing affordability. So getting into those construction methods, this Venn diagram shows the 5 main innovative construction methods that we've observed in our work at Ivory Innovations. As I mentioned, we spend a lot of time researching and tracking construction innovation. So there are some exceptions, but it's safe to say that these 5 methods represent the vast majority of what is available on the market today. As you can see, the methods are organized here into the categories of off-site or on-site. I'll be describing each method individually, and then at the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about how they compare to each other across a few key metrics, along with the implications of this off-site versus on-site distinction. I do want to quickly note here that innovative construction materials, as opposed to methods, play a major role as well. There are a ton of novel materials out there that are cost competitive or even lower costs than the traditional or legacy alternative. And many of them come with significant benefits in terms of health, sustainability, and other factors. The reason that we focus more on systems level innovations is because they tend to offer more cost savings across a project as a whole, And they also come with a much greater need for more education when you're talking about how to increase adoption. So these building materials are often one-to-one replacements for whatever the status quo is in the construction industry. But obviously, when you're talking about a whole new building method, um, the need for, as I mentioned, the need for education is much greater. The first method that we'll discuss is volumetric modular construction. This approach involves constructing entire volumes, modules, or complete rooms of a building in a factory setting. As you can see from this photo, these units, these prefabricated units, are then transported to the construction site where a crane is used to assemble them. This type of construction is pretty versatile. We see builders using volumetric modular for virtually every type of housing, from luxury single family to affordable multifamily. In spite of this versatility, though, its market share is still relatively small relative to the total housing construction market as a whole. Manufactured housing, on the other hand, is actually quite common, representing about 6% of total US housing stock. Manufactured homes, which are often referred to as mobile homes, are technically a form of volumetric modular construction, which I talked about in the last slide, but manufactured homes are distinct in that they are built to a federal building code known as the HUD code, which requires that the home be permanently affixed to a trailer chassis. The HUD code has the advantage that it allows builders to build to the same home design or floor plan for virtually any locale in the country, because the builders don't have to worry about adhering to local building codes, which often vary from place to place. However, it also makes manufactured homes a little bit less versatile, because builders have less flexibility in terms of design, aesthetics, and other elements of the home that the HUD code comes with specific stipulations for. Next, we have panelized or componentized systems. As you might recall from the Venn diagram, this method was positioned in the middle, meaning that it involves both offsite and onsite construction. Essentially, any method that incorporates some level of prefabrication but doesn't fall into the volumetric modular or manufactured categories fits here. These systems can range from something as straightforward as a prefabricated roof truss, which you can see in the photo at top middle, to a comprehensive building system that covers most aspects of a home's construction. And an example of that is we've actually been working with a company that's building Lego style plastic building blocks, which are used for most aspects, most structural aspects of a home's construction. So these systems are very versatile, and there are products in the space that are designed for really any application and any type of housing. Second to last, we have mobile automated equipment and robotics. So while offsite construction, including the three methods that we've discussed so far, has actually been around for over a century, dating back to the Sears kit homes that were popular in the 1920s and 30s, this method and the next one are much newer. So typically, you've got robots that are designed to perform a specific task or trade. The photo here shows the drywall finishing robot from a company called Canvas that we worked with last year. These robots can technically be used in any construction setting. However, they're generally going to be most effective in larger multifamily projects because the efficiency gains that you get from substituting a robot for a human or using a robot to facilitate the productivity of a human, it typically comes with efficiency gains that are going to be the largest when there is a lot of repetitive work. The last method that we'll cover today is 3D printing. So 3D printers automate the placement of concrete, typically using either a robotic arm, which is what you see in the photo, or a gantry system, which is a frame-like structure that moves the printing nozzle along fixed tracks, similar to what you'd see if you've ever looked at a desktop 3D printer. Currently, these printers are not yet efficient for constructing taller multi-story buildings, so they're mainly used for single-family homes. The 3D printer in the photo is from a company called Apis Core, which is based in Melbourne, Florida. And this is one of their 3D printers in operation. So this isn't, and this goes for all of the methods that we've talked about today. None of this is, space age, future technology. These are all technologies and building methods that are readily available on the market today. They're not offered by just one company. There's actually competitive markets for all of these building methods. So just to provide an overview of the 5 types of innovation that I talked about today, I thought it would be helpful for anyone who is new to learning about these different construction methods to see how generally they compare to each other across a few key metrics. So the metrics I've identified are number of trades impacted, ease of implementation, and versatility. And as you'd probably guess, green means good, red means bad. For number of trades impacted, we're really thinking about efficiency. The construction method that eliminates or reduces the need for on-site work for the largest number of trades is, in theory, going to offer the greatest potential for cost savings. For example, with manufactured and volumetric modular construction, the majority of the construction process takes place in the factory, so almost every trade is impacted. As a result, there's a lot of potential for cost savings there due to economies of scale and other efficiencies that you get from building in a controlled factory environment. Ease of implementation, which I alluded to earlier when I was showing the off-site versus on-site Venn diagram, is trying to measure how feasible it would be for a conventional home builder to utilize each method. Finally, versatility is really probably the broadest of the 3 metrics I show here. And the idea behind this metric is really just if you chose a housing project at random across the spectrum of single family, multifamily, luxury, affordable, student, etc. If you chose a project at random, how likely is the construction method to be able to be utilized? So for example, manufactured housing, while it is great for single family detached, isn't going to work for almost any multifamily projects. And there are some design limitations that come with manufactured housing, as I mentioned, with respect to things like roof pitch and architectural style. 3D printing can technically be used for multifamily housing, but right now, as I mentioned, the technology can't really efficiently build taller multi-story buildings. And when you're using concrete, as is the norm with 3D printing, there are going to be some inherent design and aesthetic limitations. In the far right column here, I also listed out some other considerations. And I'm not going to talk through each of these, but feel free to take a picture or, again, reach out to me, check out our website, and I can provide some additional explanation. The last point that I want to leave you with before getting into my last few slides, which are mostly resources, all of these methods, with all of these methods, you may have to try it a few times. If you're a developer or a builder in the housing space, the time savings take time. So these systems can offer significant cost savings, significant time savings, and many other advantages. But like anything new, there is inevitably going to be a learning curve. A member of our advisory board at Ivory Innovations, Ryan Smith, who is one of the preeminent scholars in the field of industrialized construction, he usually says that you need to think about implementing a new construction method with the rule of 3 in mind. So try it with 3 projects, and by the 3rd project, you're likely to have gotten to a place in terms of familiarity and understanding of the method that you're able to actually realize the time and cost savings that it offers. So here I've got some barriers to modular and manufactured housing. I think that these two construction methods are probably the most impactful of this set in terms of potential for cost savings, but there are some significant barriers. Feel free to take a look at this or to take a picture if you'd like to review. Some of these recommendations or some of these barriers are more pertinent to thinking about facilitating more widespread adoption from the standpoint of like a policymaker or an elected official. But there are some bullets that pertain specifically to folks that are developers or practitioners in the housing construction space. Uh, Before I wrap up here, as promised, I just wanted to quickly share some resources from our website. First off, we have an excellent database of builders and suppliers across all the innovative construction methods that I talked about. You can scan based on your specific location or the location of your project. And we have links and contact info. Most of the organizations in this database are folks that we have a relationship with. And we're happy to make warm intros if you find someone that you're actually interested in working with. And then finally, here's some other resources. There are links here to the papers on manufactured housing that I mentioned at the start of the presentation that I co-authored with the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard. We also have a policy solution database that pertains to how cities and counties can facilitate more widespread use of innovative construction methods in their communities. And there's tons of other great stuff on our website. So please check it out. Feel free to contact me again, chad@ivoryinnovations.org. And thanks very much for listening.
Awesome. Great presentation, Chad. Thank you so much for making time to do this. Do you have a few minutes for some questions?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. So you can probably just leave this slide up so people have
Cool.
your contact information. So you mentioned some research that you did at Harvard with the Joint Center for, was it housing?
Yeah, the Joint Center for Housing Studies is the Harvard's main housing research institute.
Got it. So I'm a huge fan of two professors there. I'm not sure if you bumped into either of them, but Dr. Joseph Allen from the T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Professor John McCumber, who is in the, I believe, real estate finance, real estate development arm of Harvard. But they've written a book called Healthy Buildings, of which I'm a huge fan of. So when you mentioned that you had done some research there at Harvard, I was very excited to find out a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Unfortunately I don't I know I've heard of Professor Allen. Um, and I probably heard of him. So I studied urban planning at Harvard and I had some friends who were dual degrees in public health. So I probably heard about him from one of those guys, but don't have any personal experience with either of those professors. Never got the chance to meet them, but sounds like a great book.
Absolutely, absolutely. I recommend it. I watched your webinar maybe late January, early February. You did a webinar similar to this with Freddie Mac and Grow America in regards to, being a recent graduate of the Developer Academy. You were one of the first presenters kind of talking about these different solutions. And so you were nice enough to communicate and share the link to your database of volumetric and modular builders. And then I proceeded to find a few in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and made two separate trips to Pittsburgh to visit their model homes and their factories. These organizations were nice enough to do that for me. But in the process, I had an opportunity, it's a 4-hour drive both ways. I had an opportunity to live and listen to the Innovations in Housing Affordability Summit that you all hosted, I believe, last year. And so got great education about the the challenges of this sector. And so thank you guys for even hosting that. I think that was amazing. My second trip up, I think you all had just launched the 2024 Ivory Prize Housing Innovation Summit. So I got to hear some practitioners there, and it sounded like you had one organization out of Montgomery County, which is not too far from we are, that was one of your prize winners. Sting, can you talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that you do in conjunction with the David Eccles School of Business and the University of Utah?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, first off, awesome to hear that the database has been useful. Awesome to hear that you were able to check out those two events that we hosted. Uh, as I mentioned, the main thing that we do is called the Ivory Prize. It's if folks have heard of maybe like MacArthur Genius grants, it's kind of like that. We really try to award the most promising, innovative solutions in the housing sphere across startups, nonprofits, government agencies, what have you. And as you mentioned, the Housing Production Fund at the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County was one of our recent winners of the Ivory Prize. We usually select 3 or 4 each year. Um, but yeah, to your question, the work that we do, so we have an operating foundation, which, as I mentioned, is building about 1,500 units of affordable housing in Utah. We have an institute at the University of Utah, which is affiliated with the David Eccles School of Business. And what we do through our office there, is really focused on inspiring and engaging the next generation of housing innovation leaders. So we employ a team of 15 or 20 student interns. They're college and grad students, mostly at the business school, some at other schools at the University of Utah. And they are deeply involved in pretty much everything that we do as an organization. We're a relatively small team. We've got about 15 full-time staff. So the interns actually outnumber us. And yeah, they're really bright students who are interested in the housing industry. They're interested in entrepreneurship. They're interested in real estate. And the main things that they do most of the research and diligence that goes into selecting the winners of the Ivory Prize each year. And then at the end of that work with the Ivory Prize, which spans the academic year, many of them actually go on to work over the summer as summer interns or summer fellows with the companies or organizations that we award or recognize with the Ivory Prize. So we have 4 mission pillars to our work at Ivory Innovations. And yeah, one of them is to inspire and engage the next generation of housing leaders. The other main thing that we do with respect to students is that hackathon that I mentioned, which is called Hack a House. And so that's an annual pitch competition where we ask students to come up with innovative ideas to advance housing affordability. They pitch and present them to folks from the companies that we've awarded, as well as our board. We select a panel of judges each year. And so, yeah, that's a 24-hour competition. It's available, or participation is open to students at any accredited university in the country. So just a little plug for Hack House. It happens at the end of September each year.
That's awesome. What a great model for other institutions across the country to follow, and especially HBCUs as well, since they're generally located in some of the hardest hit, historically redlined communities across the country.
Yeah, we
Yeah, go ahead.
worked with we sorry to interrupt, but yeah, we have partner schools that sort of help us
Okay,
administer the competition. Um, and Howard for several years. We've only hosted the competition for I think 7 years now. But yeah, Howard was one of the partner schools that we worked with for I think at least 2 or 3 years.
nice.
So Yeah.
Nice. So you talked about building code challenges that could arise from volumetric modular. Can you elaborate on what some of those might be, or I guess it depends on the jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on the jurisdiction. The challenges are, I mean, there's sort of two challenges that are both related to building code. One is at a very high level, um, and I talked a little bit about this, but so manufactured housing and modular housing are technically two distinct things.
Hmm.
Um, However, they're both forms of volumetric off, they're both forms of prefabricated housing.
Sure.
So modular housing is homes that are built offsite. They're prefabricated homes that adhere to the local building code. Manufactured homes are also prefabricated homes built offsite, but they adhere to the HUD code, which is uh, the only national building code in existence. And so what the HUD code allows manufactured home builders to do is they're really able to use a single floor plan. And obviously they might not be building the exact same floor plan and distributing it to literally every region in the US, but they have the ability to do that. And they're certainly not building specific floor plans or specific designs with respect to building code for each individual city or locale that a home might be sited in, which
Hmm.
on the modular side, that is what builders have to do. So that's challenging. And then the other main challenge is on the approval side. So we're actually working on a project, Ivory Innovations, one of our affordable housing projects that we're building in Utah right now is in Draper, Utah. And we've been really fortunate to work closely with elected officials in Draper, and their planning and permitting agencies, and they've been great to work with. But normally, permitting, the responsibility of permitting falls to your local government agency. And when you're talking about a smaller city with a smaller staff, the idea of having somebody who is, familiar enough with construction, with modular construction, to do that permitting, which generally means traveling to a modular construction factory, and basically like undertaking a permitting process that is 100% distinct from any other home that they have ever permitted in their career. That's very challenging. It's potentially less challenging when you're talking about a much bigger city where there's a higher likelihood that, somebody in one of their permitting officials has familiarity with offsite construction. But particularly in these smaller cities and towns, that's a big challenge. And so one of the things that we actually worked on supporting at Ivory Innovations was a recent change to the way that modular housing is approved across the state of Utah. This was passed just this past year. And I should actually look up the exact name of the bill. Basically, we helped centralize the inspection and approval of modular housing under a statewide program so
Hmm.
that those approvals don't have to be delegated to the, hundreds and hundreds of individual municipalities, which again often lack the resources or expertise necessary to evaluate projects using a form of construction that they have never seen before. So the bill specifically, if folks want to look it up, it was SB 0168, Affordable Building Amendments. It was signed into law March of this year. And so many states do not have a modular building program, as it's called. And that makes the permitting process just vastly more difficult and less efficient if you're trying to do a modular project.
Well, the good news for Maryland is that we do have that in place here. And so
Awesome.
the factories that I visited in two in Pittsburgh, one in Delaware, already, placing properties on sites here in Maryland. And so they've already got, kind of the state inspection kind of routine already kind of under grass, which is great. Our biggest challenge is that we're looking for, especially being here in Baltimore, where we've got 20,000, vacant lots, is an urban infill project,
Mm.
right? And so not only an urban infill product, but an urban infill project that's zero energy ready. And so I was able to kind of narrow down two or three factories that did this and was able to visit some of their models while both in Pittsburgh and out in Delaware. And so, all that's fun. The biggest challenge that we're finding is because we're really focused on zero energy ready homes, um, finding the general contractor here locally that can prepare the job site to meet those standards is where the biggest friction and the biggest barrier is, to the point where some of the factories are saying, you know what, until you find somebody that we're satisfied with, we're not, the conversation's not going much further. So, we've got, from a panelized perspective, we have Blueprint Robotics here in Baltimore. They do great work, and very innovative work. They're more so on the panelized side, more so multifamily. Where our approach is focusing on, volumetric modular for, single family urban infill. So that seems to be our biggest challenge, is just finding general contractors that kind of understand the site preparation for a zero energy ready home. Are you finding any what solutions would you think of from your vast resources of connections out there in the ether?
Yeah. No, I mean that is a challenge. And yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we're doing our own modular projects, and that's a challenge that we deal with too. It makes me think, or reminds me on the manufactured side. Like I know in some states there's actually like specific licensure requirements, like
Hmm.
a whole manufactured specific licensure program that's administered by the state.
Hmm.
Um, and while it's a solution on one hand, it ensures that there are contractors that are familiar with manufactured housing installation and
Yeah.
construction standards. What we actually found while we were doing the case studies for these papers on manufactured housing, which are linked at the top of the screen here, um, we actually found that a lot of developers in California that were building with manufactured housing were having a really hard time finding folks that had that specific license.
Hmm.
So, I think it's a difficult problem to solve. Um, I think ultimately it's sort of just a byproduct of the fact that these building methods are still not utilized as widely as they could be. And if they were, there would be more demand for contractors, and the market would inevitably over time adapt to meet that demand, and there would be more contractors that have familiarity with
And this isn't known to be a new methodology, right? It just seems like Germany and Norway have and the Netherlands have totally kind of, from what I've been researching, kind of mastered our initial invention, I guess. I don't know if you got to look at it that way, but
Yeah, no, I mean we absolutely do. We absolutely do. Offsite construction is not at all new. It's just, for various reasons, it has sort of lacked. I mean, it's a complicated question, Aaron, because on one hand, yes, modular construction specifically represents a relatively minuscule portion of the housing market.
Mhm.
But manufactured housing is also offsite construction, And manufactured housing, while there's certainly room for growth in terms of the market share of manufactured housing, but it is it's millions of Americans that live
Sure.
in manufactured housing. Manufactured housing is the leading source of unsubsidized affordable housing in the United States. And it's a decent, it's probably 7% now of US housing stock. So,
So
it's a complicated
what are
question.
you guys building in Utah? Are you using volumetric, panelized, manufactured? What methodology have you chosen?
The project we have I think we're up to 7 projects now across Utah. Um, we have a couple of projects that we're currently looking at. The one in Draper that I mentioned, we'll use modular. We have another project that is still in the planning stage, but we're looking at using modular for that one. These are all, I should mention, these are all either multifamily apartments or townhomes.
Hmm.
So manufactured housing is not an option.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, we're looking at using modular for a couple. We have one that we're actually starting construction on this year, which is an adaptive reuse of an existing building, and we're looking at, implementing basically using some innovative materials. We're planning to use wood fiber insulation, which is, another one of the building innovations that, while very common in Europe, really is not utilized at all in the US, but
Hmm.
great sustainability benefits from that
Hmm.
material.
Hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, the majority of the others are, we're trying to use innovative products, innovative materials, which I've mentioned very briefly. But obviously, as you mentioned, modular is not always a fit. The other building methods that I mentioned, 3D printing, we wouldn't use that in Utah. That's usually best suited to natural disaster prone areas. It's more widely used in like Florida,
Hmm. Hmm.
Texas, for
Hmm.
example, places
Yeah,
where building with concrete is already fairly common.
hmm.
And then, yeah, panelized stuff. That's certainly an option that we would look at on any of the projects that we are building with conventional site built construction generally.
Hmm.
Um, Same with materials. And the robots, the automation and robots, because our multifamily projects are not, I mean, they're not high-rise multifamily, which is at this point the sort of scale that you need to really make uh make those sort of technologies pencil for a project. We're probably not going to be using any of those, but we are using modular, we are using innovative materials.
Well, I think the volumetric model is perfectly suited for a landscape like Baltimore that has more historic architecture than New York and DC combined, and is really, I don't want to say one of the first. I guess Boston would probably say they're one of the first to come up with this, attached row home typology. So the Lego box ethos of volumetric construction, it fits perfect with a 13-foot wide, 16-foot wide type of lot. My last question before I let you go, and thank you so much. This has been amazing. Um, you mentioned demonstrating innovation through government-led projects. Are there any examples in some of the links and resources that you have here of some government-led projects that people can look to as kind of a case study of how to potentially do that here in their own jurisdiction?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I also want to say I'm honored to be here. Really pleased to be able to talk to more folks about what we do and about the benefits that these constructions can offer. Um, these links, there's nothing in these links specifically on the screen. That said, the first project that comes to mind for me is an example of a government-led project that utilizes construction or industrialized construction in some way would be a project in Minneapolis by the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. Um, and they actually built some, I think it was some 80 units. It was a scattered site multifamily housing. Um, and yeah, they used modular construction. They worked with a factory called Rise, that's based, I think, just outside of the Twin Cities. And yeah, it was a very successful project. And the reason that we think the government-led projects are so important at this, still relatively early stage in the
Mhm.
broader adoption
Mhm.
of modular and of industrialized construction generally, uh, is because, yeah, you often need, developers and builders tend to be very risk averse. There tends to be a lot of path dependence in these industries where folks do things the way they do it because that's the way they've done it. And there's a lot of risk in taking on an entirely new workflow, an entirely new building method. You got to retrain your workforce, and maybe you don't really know if it works. You don't know if it works for your application or in your market.
Which spells disaster for an industry that's the least digitized, declining in productivity, and has strong resistance to change.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're exactly so you get it. Yeah. I mean, and so Uh, yeah, having a government agency, having a public-private entity take on that initial risk and sort of
De-risk it, yeah.
signal to the rest of the folks in that market that, hey, this works. Here's how you do it.
Well,
Uh,
that's what NYSERDA has done from an commercial real estate energy reduction, greenhouse gas reduction perspective. NYSERDA in New York City has
yep,
helped de-risk that whole proposition for building owners to make that change in the right direction to comply with local law 97. So you're right. There are definitely. So I did make a note of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority with RISE, and I'll see if I can find it and link it up with your presentation.
awesome. Yeah, the last thing that I just wanted to say quickly, and Aaron, it sounds like you're pretty tuned in. You know what's going on, but uh we did in the case studies that I worked on with Chris Herbert, who's my co-author at the Joint Center for Housing Studies on this last paper, overcoming barriers for promising approaches for 5 case studies for manufactured housing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think from what I've heard in our brief conversation, I would look into manufactured housing for those infill opportunities in Baltimore. Um, the new housing type that the manufactured housing industry is promoting is this product called cross-mod. A lot of folks are sort of opposed to manufactured housing because they think of your traditional kind of, your tin box, sort of uglier homes, if we're being totally candid. And the new products that the manufactured housing industry is putting out are aesthetically, they're visually indistinguishable from site built homes. They often work really well on those longer row home style lots. And there are a number of folks that are experimenting, or I would say they're past experimenting. They're using them in these infill applications. There's actually a big project that Chris Nicely, who's one of the folks that we worked with a lot on this manufactured housing project. I know that he's a part of this project in Detroit, which is using manufactured housing for that exact type of application. So just a
So
little plug.
it sounds like you've given me a reason to overcome my stigma of of manufactured
You
housing
got to overcome it, Aaron. You got to.
and look into cross mod and see kind of the innovation on that side of things. Because traditionally when I think of it, I know what it looks like, but it sounds like there's been some large moves forward in innovative ways to deliver a product with the same methodology without the stigma.
Absolutely. The manufactured housing has been building homes off-site for decades now.
Yeah.
It's an established industry.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the cost savings we found in our first paper, this comparing the cost paper, the cost savings, even for CrossMod, which is sort of the premium level product within the manufactured housing industry, cost savings are significant. You're talking like 30+% savings relative to a site-built home with the exact same characteristics. So, you know, it's arguably greater cost savings than you can get even from volumetric modular.
And
so
with the HUD stamp of approval, has the potential to make life a lot easier. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
I'll keep you posted. Hey, Chad, man, it's been great talking to you. I could talk to you all day and nerd out about this. So I really appreciate your time and your thought leadership and your subject matter expertise on the topic. This has been really exciting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, glad to be here. To the folks in Baltimore, please feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in talking about anything that I presented on today.
Appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.